I begin the story in 1928, because, though I had by that time been fortunate enough to have been among the army of broadcasters for 2 years, in 1928, I had a terrific emotional experience that culminated in a very small, dark room at Savoy Hill.
In case you have not read your Radio Times, I must tell you the ideas which the kaleidoscope aims at getting through the microphone. Panorama of man's life to be broadcast. Interesting experiment to be made. 7 or 8 studios. Over 100 people will take part. BBC's broadcast picture of the life of an ordinary man. Something new in broadcasting.
I caught back my breath as I remembered that all this meant me. Someone had to go downstairs in 25 minutes' time and operate the handles in the little box on that office table. That someone was me.
The noise will be fairly alarming, I expect, but you'll know what it's all about. You will find that it is very like the toy kaleidoscope you had as a child, or the moving pattern effects in a modern film such as Metropolis. Only, of course, in this case, it is all done with sound.
I went to Saint-Tropez in the south of France. It was August. The heat was terrific. I talked to the artists who thronged the quayside cafes, bathed in broiling sunshine, and read books. Here I was, on a holiday before returning to London, to plunge into an exciting and marvelous a business as I had ever known since the time when, years earlier, Graham White had taught me to fly. As I was saying, in 1928, I had a terrific emotional experience that culminated in a very small dark room at Savoy Hill. And so, on the evening referred to earlier, I dressed myself in a white tie and tailcoat. I entered Savoy Hill just exactly in the state of mind in which, one imagines, a young composer might enter the opera house at, say, Prague in 1840 to conduct for the first time an opera of his own composition. I climbed the stairs to my quaint office. For a moment or two, I glanced at the day's newspapers thrown in a pile on a chair. They all seemed to be as conscious as I was of the stupendous nature of what we were going to do this evening.
This program, which I have called the Kaleidoscope, is an experiment. It may be a successful experiment or not, but I hope in either case you will find it interesting.
I straightened my white tie, picked up my producer's script, and opening the door, I took one last glance around the ugly little room I might never see again. I marched down the passage and went from room to room, from studio to studio, on a tour of inspection and encouragement. In each studio, I found people waiting, eye on clock, an orchestra with bows poised. In another studio, another orchestra with bows poised, and conductor with baton up. In another studio, the chorus, standing in a row with breath held for a huge first note. I smiled at them. Without letting go of that breath, they smiled back. Was everything all right? Everybody there? Everyone had their music, their script? Yes? Well, good luck. Good luck to you. The effects staff down in their underground studio. An army of young men, each with a script, a headphone, and a gun. Railway accident or seagull in a storm set nicely before him. I smiled at them. Everything okay? Okay? I had a word or two with Robert Harris, my leading man, with John Gielgud, my voice of good, and Val Gielgud, my studio manager. I waved in what I hoped was an encouraging way to the rest of the cast. Okay? Okay. Then I went downstairs and entered a tiny office in which a dozen people were sitting in semi-darkness. On one side of this room was an office desk covered with papers and telephones. On a shelf behind it was a small loudspeaker. To the right was another office table. On this stood a small oblong box of brown wood from which projected a row of knobs. I sat down in silence at the table and laid my book open. I looked at the dramatic control panel, as the little box was called. Yes, it was set. My eyes were fixed on the red electric bulb over the door. They moved restlessly between it and the clock in 10 seconds, in 8, The red electric light began to flick on and off, on and off, on and off. I pressed a bell push. My heart stood still. I sat in silence. I felt exactly as I felt on that cold, bright morning when I had been told to take the aeroplane into the air alone for the first time. Exactly. I had been in at the birth of flying, and now, once more, I was in at the birth of something of which, when you were doing it, no one could say for certain what would happen. Above every door of every studio, a red light had come on and stayed on. The world was listening. No turning back now. We were off. The rotary engine roared just behind my back. Forward, the little joystick. I am rolling, rolling, faster, faster. Balance, balance! A touch of rudder. No. Back with the joystick, and up we go! I pressed a cue light switch. The right one. Then heave.
The kaleidoscope. A rhythm. Representing the life of a man from cradle to grave. Constructed and produced by Sieveking.
Can't you hear? It's only the sea. Just the sea. And swish of the many sounding waters of the sea. You didn't really like that silly thing, did you?
This tree of first encounters and acquaintances is intended to show how one's life is given a shape by the people one meets, and the people through whom one meets them. It was in the early days of September that I first saw Paul Nash. I remember with extraordinary clarity the feeling of that first meeting. Our eyes met, and it was as if we had always known each other. It was friendship at first sight. But when, from time to time, I looked again at the drawings and paintings of Nash, something about them stirred me. I found myself looking at the whole of nature through his eyes. The slopes and curves of hills, the previously unnoticed sharply opposing angles in objects that go to make up landscapes, the real shapes and colors of natural things, instead of the traditionally accepted shapes and colors that are not true because they interpret nothing. It was as though I had been blind before. Paul's work enhanced and enlarged and interpreted the whole of life for me.
There's nothing to be gained by action. Just take what pleasure falls to hand and let the fruit on the higher branches rot. The smell of decay is wonderfully exciting.
I was interested to notice that the Russian film director, Mr. Podovkin, had been thinking along exactly the same lines as I had, in the matter of tempo generally, and close-up of time in particular. In 1930, Mr. Podovkin shot a man's smile in slow motion. In 1929, I shot his voice in the same way. There you have a kaleidoscope of action giving one main impression. That is, the film giving something which only the film could give. I began to think of the microphone in that way. The first 2 or 3 pages passed in a trance. I faded one studio in after another. I flicked cue lights at certain points, all in a state of suspended consciousness. Presumably, everything progressed from point to point as rehearsed. I heard nothing. It was not until the top of page 4 that I came out of my trance and heard what was coming out of the loudspeaker. They were at the school scene. Football on playing fields in the distance behind a voice describing wet autumnal afternoons, with an occasional fading in of a singer in the middle background singing Ich liebe dich. Ah, so that's where we were. My fingers knew well enough, even if my head did not, just as they do on the piano or the cello. Without consciously reading the directions, I faded the tiny football matches out off the horizon and whipped up the narrator off the map with the singer and then cut the music off sharply. Now it was play, play, play the instrument if ever you did anything in your life. Hold it up nicely now, gently up a long crescendo of one orchestra in perspective behind another. Now Flick Studio 2, now Studio 4, now number 1. Crossfade. Ah, that's the way! He's got it! The dramatic control panel is the central instrument of the new art. All the studios are centralized here, listening to what you're doing as it comes out of the loudspeaker. Now you could begin to make those patterns and those pictures which melt as you listen. Do you remember assuring me that the new regime would in no way affect the course of my work? Well, something has occurred which does affect it vitally. A decision has been made which means that I and others are no longer allowed to handle the dramatic control panel. I cannot tell you how important it is to me to use the panel personally. This new decision cuts at the very heart of my work. Observations about a new art, comparing its technique with that of other arts, such as theatre, television. This book is dedicated with personal warmth to Sir John Reith, who, like a patron in the Middle Ages, has made it possible for an art to flourish by enabling artists and craftsmen to devote their lives to its practice and development in freedom from any limitations save those which have seemed, in an ever-modifying degree, inherent in it. Then came the third phase. And now we come to the first of the kaleidoscopes. How's the timing going? Clock above loudspeaker on the wall? Ah, running well. Made up that minute already, so we can afford to give full rein now, but not a fraction of a second too long. Everything depends on the timing, that it shall be exact to a psychological second. So now give them their cues and one after another fade them up. The big orchestra, one of the singers, the musical box, the marching feet, the untuned for voices singing Tipperary, the quintet, the dance band. Then mix them about. Whirl, whirl, whirl goes the kaleidoscope. Swoop goes the good influence of the big orchestra playing the Beethoven. Swoop goes the dance band doing the evil stuff, all full of hot dirt, as they call it. Swoopity-swoop comes up the quintet, sleepily oozing Vienna woods, arm in arm with the singer of the German ballad in a different key, and crash coming the boys with their marching feet, and so up comes the big orchestra doing the Beethoven. There's the huge voice of evil saying over the head and shoulders of all the mixed perspective of other things, a poem. It is not a howling declamatory poem, but it's so big. Gradually evil wins, and gently, slowly in the poem, with the syncopation fading behind it, the character of the man suffers a temporary defeat of the good in it. And we are into a scene with a girl on a hillside. They're in the open air, just the two of them, up on the hillside where? Derbyshire or Bavaria or somewhere. They're in love. It's sweet. They're both so young, so pure. Page after page, on and on, the story unfolds itself. Evil wins all along the line, as it so often does. Down goes our man till we've had war. Peace, war again, guns of Flanders and guns of conscience. And then, at last,
oh God,
after having had pictures, dramas, musics, emotions, at last, good is going to win. The river rushes by. What a night! How they are howling and whining like lost souls down in the effects studio. The river rushes by. The man stumbles in the darkness. My, how dark it is! A stranger speaks to him. There's a voice. His wife's. She's drowning. Where's she coming from? What's the matter? There she is, drowning. And then up comes good old Beethoven and Handel on twin orchestras playing fit to burst, and Good says, well, are you going to let her drown? And Evil says, rats, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow
creeps into this petty.
And up comes Beethoven and Handel and wipes him off, and there in the dark he jumps in and saves her and is drowned. And suddenly, all the trumpets sound to him on the other side.
Listen to the sea.
It isn't the sea.
And the play is over.
Let us say that the influences which come into a man's life very largely determine his character. It is during a crisis that his character shows itself most clearly, and the influences which have made him lead him to take whatever course he adopts. In this first two crises, bad gets the best of it, and the man does the rotten thing. And in the last crisis, good wins, and he does the decent thing.
A Beethoven symphony, faded against jazz, is symbolic of the sacred and profane love forces in the characters of Kaleidoscope. A feature program is an arrangement of sounds, which has a theme but no plot. It is worth recording that when after more than 5 years after its first production, Kaleidoscope was revived and broadcast again, it passed practically unnoticed. The reason for this is that many of the things attempted in that play have long since been absorbed into the technique of radio plays and programs as a whole.
In the Sonic Century, a new art, Lad Sieveking was played by Colin Morgan.